Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 12th of October 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all of that good stuff. You can email in mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, that's mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, with topics for future shows. Game in the background is FTL. We are perhaps nearing the end of this playthrough. Will I finish it? Will I not? You will find out very soon. First email comes in here from Derek Wong that says, is there a reason that OnLive was sold so cheaply? While I admit its advertisements were interesting, to say the least, and the service has been dodgy for those without good internet connections, I'm still floored that the price tag was so low. With new internet coming across in NA, such as Google Fiber, and newer, faster internet systems being implemented in countries just coming online, wouldn't this technology retain more of its value? To me, $5 million for OnLive is simply too low for a service that is most likely ahead of its time. What are your thoughts on this? Well, my thoughts on this is the chances are they're also taking on all the debt of OnLive. This is what happens when a company is running in the negative and they go up for sale. More often than not, the sale price is very low. You see some companies go for $1 or £1. I think, if I recall correctly, Rover, the car manufacturer in the UK, was sold for 10 quid. Yes, but the point is that they also have to take on the responsibility for all the debt. And no doubt OnLive has it. There's no way in a million years OnLive has made back the money that they've spent thus far. It's just not even feasible for that to have happened. There has been a ton of R&D money sunk into OnLive, not only in the case of the technology to stream over the internet with a reasonable amount of latency. I say reasonable because, well, I don't really see a service that does it better. And then also the technology on the server end and the technology on the home end. We're not just talking about the client, we're talking about the micro console. They had to develop an entirely new controller as well. It's not a bad one either, actually. It's kind of sad to see OnLive go the way that it does. I hope that I can use that controller with something else. That would be nice. But at the end of the day, they weren't making enough money. So that's why they've had to fire a bunch of people, and that's why they've then had to put the servers up for sale. And I'm actually kind of surprised that it went for as much as it did, considering. I wonder if they're as deep in the hole as I think they are. Probably not. Maybe they at least have some capital to work with, and maybe someone sees the potential. I think you're right. We're getting to the point where maybe it will work. The problem is OnLive really only exists in 3 countries. That's the US, the UK, and Belgium. If you are not within those areas, then you can't really use OnLive effectively because the pings are simply too damn high. So the places where internet is really, really good don't have OnLive. Arr? Why was this not unleashed in Sweden? It makes perfect sense to put it in Sweden. It makes perfect sense to try and do it in South Korea, assuming you could go even with some kind of PC bang model, whereby you were paying by the hour but you were paying from home, rather than actually having to go to a PC bang to do it. There's all sorts of potential opportunities there, and South Korea has the internet connection for it. Hell, even countries like Romania have pretty damn good internet, and yet the service isn't in any of those countries, so it just seemed really, really short-sighted. Actually, no, I want to take that back. It was long-sighted. They thought too far ahead. When you say ahead of its time, you're right. You build a system that doesn't really work within the current infrastructure of the countries that you're trying to sell it within. Now, that's not to say that it's terrible. It's actually not. I've used OnLive, and it's not bad. It's surprisingly not bad. But it's not as good as it needs to be, and there are many games that just don't work well with it. Fighting games are a prime example. They've actually got Street Fighter on there. It's like, you kidding me, right? Yeah. Think about the worst lag you've ever had on Street Fighter. So we're talking like Red, 1 bar, some guy from Korea is playing you, and you're doing it over Games for Windows Live. Yeah, think about that, then multiply it by 3. Because that's what you get with the OnLive system. It's pretty bad in that respect. Although, there are other disadvantages with OnLive, and I've explained these time and again. I don't want to go into them again. But I think that it comes down to the fact that they tried to launch a service that really didn't have much of a place. And also, I think maybe they got the pricing model wrong. Now, I think the monthly subscription thing is quite nice, and I think the rental option isn't too bad either, but you are still competing with services like Redbox, which are much, much better value. There's also things like Gamefly, which are also better value. I mean, the thing about Gamefly is that when you sign up to Gamefly, you pay a certain amount, but you get access to a lot of the latest stuff, whereas if you buy a pass with OnLive, you don't. The pass gets you access to some pretty decent material, but it doesn't get you access to the latest, which is actually what you're looking to do. The newest titles in Play Pack are things like Civ 5, that's the original without the expansion, Arkham Asylum, Bioshock, Just Cause 2, Borderlands. These games are 1 to 2 years old, and they're not bad games, but they are still relatively old, and more than likely have been put on sale multiple times on Steam. And I've got to ask, well, do you want to pay for a play pack with OnLive, or do you want to actually have the game permanently and get it for a discount price, which is not difficult to do with Steam. And getting BioShock, I think, for £3.75 or $5 is something you've had multiple opportunities to do. Just Cause 2 has been the same. Arkham Asylum, I think, has gone down to probably about $6 total. And the rental system is just not really that great value. Let's take Arkham Asylum as an example. It's $20 to get this thing forever. So you say, oh, well, I own this game. Well, you don't really. It's running off a cloud server. So if OnLive happens to go the way of the dodo, then, well, all of the games that you've just bought cease to exist. It's not even a case of the way Steam may theoretically go. If Steam were to implode, then there would most likely be a solution, and you have the files on your system. With OnLive, you don't have the files on your system, so it's very easy to see why people would get horrendously gun-shy about a service like this. Rental costs are really high as well. We're talking about 3 days of Batman Arkham Asylum for $5 and 5 days for $7. And that's just for Arkham Asylum. Borderlands, that being the original Borderlands, is $6 for 3 days and $9 for 5. This is ridiculous. I mean, you can buy the full damn thing, Game of the Year edition, on Steam when it goes on sale, like, every month, for cheaper than that. Why would you even bother with it? It's just not a good value for money service, and it's aimed at a really weird demographic, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I've said this time and again. It's sadly very repetitious to continue harping on about it, but this is the situation with OnLive, and this is why it has gone the way that it has. It is still kind of sad because I'm impressed by the technology. I think maybe if the iPad version had come out earlier, and this is not their fault, by the way, this is entirely Apple's fault. They are deliberately stalling it. Yeah, that's the wonderful thing about the Apple Store, isn't it? Oh, you own an Apple device? Well, you're bound to the whims and will of Apple, which at times is very, very malicious. And quite frankly, I didn't think they wanted OnLive available on that system, because it would probably drive the sales of their little iOS games down. Why play iOS games when I can play Assassin's Creed Revelations on my sodding iPad? I can do that anyway using Splashtop, but yeah, it's a pretty damn good idea, isn't it? And the iOS version is still not out, so maybe that would have saved them. But still, they wandered into a very odd marketplace, tried to create their own marketplace, and did not manage to do so. And this is why it's where it is right now. I'm hoping the service survives, adapts, and changes, and we get more of a streaming Redbox style service for OnLive. But at the moment, it's not a service that I see many people using, and, well, I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Quite frankly, they are not getting enough custom. This one comes in from Gaunchen that says, yesterday I found out that Chris Roberts, the maker of Freelancer, is making another space sim title. Naturally, I was very excited and went on to find everything I could about the game. However, when I saw the trailer, it seems Star Citizen's trailer is giving out a very anti-console vibe. I wish to know your opinion on why Chris Roberts won't make this title available for consoles, at least that's what I assume after watching the trailer, and the reason for general lacking of space sims on console in recent years. Well, unfortunately, it's just one of those genres that doesn't work all that well, and as a result of the lack of interface options that you happen to have with a console, you run into problems with traditional space sims. The thing with traditional space sims is they take a lot of bloody keys in order to properly run them, and the less keys you have, generally the more you actually dumb the game down, because you have less options. Now, I know some people really hate the term dumbing down, but when it comes to space sims, it's very, very accurate. Space sims of yore, such as, of course, Free Space 2, Starlancer, Freelancer, X-Wing, TIE Fighter, Wing Commander, things like that, they all utilized a hell of a lot of buttons, and the reason they did so is because they gave you a lot of options to tweak your fighter while in flight. The idea of being able to push shield power in particular directions, the idea of being able to power manage as you went along, pushing power to weapons, engines, defenses, and so on and so forth, the different kinds of countermeasures and ECM, the wide variety of different weapons available, switch between targets, switch to friendly targets, switch to target that is targeting your target, switch to incoming torpedoes, switch to incoming drones and missiles, so on and so forth. All of this stuff is in the game and uses different keys in order to make it happen. Now, that's not even to mention the notion of the even more complex space simulator, the 4X space simulator, the idea that you have a free-roaming space universe. Now, Freelancer is probably one of the simplest examples of a game that did that. More hardcore examples would include, of course, the Elite franchise, as well as the X Beyond the Frontier franchise. Those games use an awful lot of buttons, not to mention a massive amount of power. So when it comes down to running a game like that on console, you've got to think to yourself, well, how am I structuring this? Will there be any kind of open universe whatsoever? Because if there is, then I might be running into problems with storage, with processing power, and all sorts of things like that. How's the physics engine going to operate? Because some of that stuff can get pretty damn complicated in space. And that's assuming that you can get over all the controller problems. There were a few space sims that did come out. I'm trying to think of a few of them now. In fact, some of them came out for Dreamcast, funnily enough. One was Starlancer. The version of Starlancer for Dreamcast was definitely not as good as the one for PC, but it was still reasonable fun. But unfortunately, they did have to really dumb things down just a little bit in order to make it work properly on a controller like that. Bear in mind that the Dreamcast controller didn't even have a second analog stick. So you've got to think, well, wow, how on earth do I make that work? There was also a game called Project Sylphie that was by Squeenix, and that was, once again, not particularly complex. So the question is, what kind of game do you want? Because if you want a game like Star Citizen, well, quite frankly, you're not going to get it on console because you don't have enough buttons. Now, just bear in mind that Star Citizen is not just a case of, hey, this is a level, and here's the next level, and here's the next level. No, it's actually a combination of two games, technically, Star Citizen and Squadron 42. Squadron 42 is supposed to be the single player, which is a case of you being in the military and taking on missions, so that reminds you of Starlancer. And then Star Citizen is, there's an entire bloody universe, go and explore it, and that's your Freelancer aspect to it. Do you really think you can pull that off on a console? Well, does it even have the power? Currently, no, it doesn't, because the console generation is continuing to drag on to a ridiculous degree, whereas PC is leaving them in the dust, power-wise, and you need that horsepower in order to make a big universe simulation like X Beyond the Frontier and even Freelancer, which is quite an old game. I've always said this, there is no reason for any game not to be on a PC, because a PC is almost infinitely configurable to do what you want to do. You can even use a Kinect with a PC, you can use a Wiimote with a PC, you can use a fight stick, a joystick, a wheel, anything you can possibly imagine can be plugged into a USB port, and there can be drivers written for it. So there is no reason for games not to be on PC. There are some reasons for games not to be on console, and one of them is the limitations of the interface. The other is, of course, the limitations of the technology. And there have been attempts to bring games like this to console in the past, and they just haven't worked. It's like the situation we currently have with PC when we get bad ports. Console used to get bad ports. When console wasn't the primary platform, yeah, they got some terrible ports. They really did. I mean, God, the number of consoles that got Doom and the number of consoles that screwed it up, it just beggars belief. How do you screw up Doom? Well, there were plenty of examples of consoles that did. I think when it comes to this trailer, it's very much kind of a rallying cry because they are trying to crowdfund this game, and more to the point, they're actually doing it outside of Kickstarter, which I think is probably because the guy in question is not in the US. You unfortunately cannot use Kickstarter if you're not in the US. You have to have a US company of some sort, so I assume that his company, which I assume is Robert Space Industries, does not exist in the US, so you can't use Kickstarter. But I'm intrigued to see how it goes. I really hope it gets done, because, I mean, what I've seen in the trailer, it looks incredible. It looks like they've got an awful lot done with the engine already, and they have the right kind of idea. And yeah, I do want to see games like this. There is already a game series out there that does it, and there is a new game coming quite soon from the X series, which looks pretty interesting. There's also Starlight Inception, that's on its way, that's been successfully funded, so it's a good time, man. It is a good time to be a PC gamer, as far as I'm concerned. This one comes in from Raoul. I assume it's Raoul. Makes you sound like some kind of Middle Eastern warrior. I recently watched your WTF Viz of Retro City Rampage, and it reminded me of a conversation I had quite a while ago with a friend of mine, in which I asked him what was so good about the Scott Pilgrim vs. the World comics, as he was a big fan of them. The first words that came out of his mouth were literally, well, it's got a lot of references. Then we had a bit of an argument on whether or not pop culture references should even be considered when determining how good a video game or any other product is. What is your take on the matter? Well, that is a tricky one, is it not? I think that it really depends on how you present the product. With Retro City Rampage, the whole point was to create this giant nostalgia bomb. So you just laden the bloody thing with as many references as you possibly can. Game mechanical references, actual visual references, audio references, written references, everything you can possibly imagine is thrown into that game. It's this one giant hot pot of nostalgia and old school game design, which is very interesting because they then tried to bring it bang up to date using a new engine. Crazy. I mean, the whole fact that game even exists still boggles my mind. But as I said in the video, I'm glad that it does exist. It's really cool that something like that was actually made today. However, references being a selling point, well, they are for some people. I think that sometimes it does go a little bit overboard. I think there's a good example of a game that goes really overboard with it, and it's probably World of Warcraft. Now, I've got to say that when you do this with an RPG, that's when problems start to occur. There are an awful lot of people that care about the lore and the integrity of the universe for World of Warcraft, for whatever reason. I personally don't care about it, but I understand that other people do. So, when you put these references into the game, it becomes increasingly jarring to see pop culture reference after pop culture reference, and some of them not even remotely well-veiled. Come on, there are some that are fairly intelligent. There are some that, while not intelligent, are at least relatively subtle, and then there are some that are just blindingly obvious in every possible way, and it just shoves it right in your face, and it can really break the immersion and just give this tacky feeling to the universe. And I think that you're getting to the point of almost breaking the fourth wall in that situation. Now, you can get away with this stuff in Borderlands. The fact that there are Minecraft creepers and all sorts of crazy references in Borderlands, it's fine. The whole universe is silly to begin with, whereas World of Warcraft attempts at least to be vaguely serious. So I think that's the line that you really have to draw between the two. Is it trying to be a serious universe? Because if it is, then it probably shouldn't be throwing pop culture references in there. Now, when it comes down to selling point, well, it really comes down to individual taste. I think that the Scott Pilgrim versus the World comics, at least I assume they are because I've never actually read them, I've watched the movie and I've played the video game, I would assume that some of their popularity stems from the fact that they are very much aimed at people that like video games, video game culture, and to some degree anime culture. So the idea that you put references in there does add strength to the actual series. I mean, you can't really do the Scott Pilgrim versus the World story without using references, because it directly references video games. There are other examples. In fact, there's one coming out very soon, Wreck-It Ralph. We actually finally see a crazy idea from Hollywood whereby they take a bunch of different video game characters and create an original story surrounding that. That lives or dies upon how well they use the references. I don't think it's ever something you can fully discount, but at the end of the day, the game still has to be good. The piece of media still has to be good. Scott Pilgrim is still a good movie, even if it's laden with references, and actually especially because it's laden with references. It's just how you approach the idea of that. And Retro City Rampage is also still a good game. I mean, it's simple, there's no question about that, but it's hard to argue that it's not a good game, at least in its own individual niche. So yeah, I think you can use them as selling points, but I wouldn't view them as being particularly important, unless, of course, you happen to be Wreck-It Ralph or Retro City Rampage. Okay, folks, that is me done for the day, and it's also me rounding up for the week with the mailbox. Thank you very much. Please do have a safe and enjoyable weekend, and I shall see you next time.